Shalom, welcome. Tonight we're going to look a little more deeply into this topic we started in our newsletter called Meditative Stargazing. We explored it through the last chapter of the Sefer Yetzirah, where it says that Abraham gazed, was successful, and a covenant was made. And we look a little more deeply into the word covenant. It doesn't just mean a binding agreement between two parties, although it does mean that. More deeply, it means a mystical connection between the field of consciousness within us and within another. So as we look more deeply into that connection that we call covenant, and we look more deeply into how we experience it, it brings us to a core concept that is contained within our tradition. And that is that within us and without us is one. We have a symbiotic relationship with all of creation. And that symbiotic relationship is mutualistic. It's a two-way street. It's not parasitic as a one-way street. So when we, in our meditation, transcend from the conscious thinking level through the subconscious thinking level into that being, that pure, unified field of consciousness, we experience what we call in our tradition the cosmic sea. Sefer Yetzirah talks about 32 states of consciousness, or 32 paths. And that very first path is a description of transcendental consciousness, this unified field of pure consciousness. This is the first state of higher consciousness for us, to experience within ourselves that pure state of consciousness. And then, as we look outside of ourselves, slowly, with our meditative practice, we begin to see the same unified field consciousness that's within us outside of us, as we begin to make these connections with nature. And one of the primary ways to make that connection is connection with the stars, the planets, the earth, the air, the water. The Sefer Yetzirah describes these things to us as experiencing unity within ourselves and outside of ourselves. So this is that symbiotic, mutualistic relationship that we have. And we focus first on these stars and planets. There's a great book that I highly recommend, written by Iris and Carl Schreiber, called How the Human Body is Connected to the Life Cycles of the Earth, the Planets, and the Stars. She is a pathology professor at Stanford University, and he is an astrophysicist at Lockheed Martin. It's written, though, not just from a scientific perspective, but from a layman's perspective, so you can really understand it. So right now, we're really talking about concepts. And the thing about concepts and reality is that concepts are fine, but until we actually have an experience of the true nature of the concept, they really aren't a reality. It's probably not a good idea to get fixed or rigid about concepts that haven't become a reality in your life. For an example, when we teach meditation, we teach you in the first lesson the concepts of transcending and unified field and so on. They're concepts. But in the very next lesson, we teach you a practice that enables you to experience it. So what's happening is taking a concept, and through the practice and experience, we're making that concept a reality. And the same is true with the concepts that we're talking about tonight, which are meditative stargazing, symbiotic relationship between your field of consciousness and the consciousness that's within a star, or within your neighbor, or within the earth itself. So those are concepts, but then we actually can experience them. I remember the first time that I really truly experienced this symbiotic relationship, this conduit of energy opening from my field of consciousness to the field of consciousness in another. I'd been meditating for a while, and I decided I wanted to go on a teacher training course in La Antilla, Spain. and meet Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So I didn't have the money to do it. I had just recently graduated from high school and I was scheduled to go to college, but I was so enthralled by my experiences in meditation that I wanted to forego college to go on this teacher training course. So I decided to take a job driving a small truck to save the money to go on this 4-month course. And one of my stops was, I was either making a delivery, this is 40 years ago, so I'm not sure if I was making a delivery or a pickup, but I found myself coming to this customer's place that had a huge, beautiful greenhouse. And in this greenhouse, they grew flowers and they grew little fruit trees and vegetables. And I went into the greenhouse and I had this overwhelming experience of pure energy. There was water dripping down onto the plants and the sun was coming in through the greenhouse and the plants themselves were emitting this pure consciousness energy. So I asked the proprietor if he would mind if I sat for a few minutes in meditation. And when I did so and I opened my eyes, I experienced this flow of love, this flow of consciousness from myself into the plants and the flowers and the trees around me, like a cycle, a circle, back and forth. And this symbiotic relationship was no longer a concept for me, but in fact was a reality for me. And when you dive into the cosmic sea and you experience that unified field within yourself, when you come out of that state of consciousness and you experience another, a person or something in nature or the stars and the planets, that love is overwhelming. And you don't come out of meditation and feel like, oh, I want to hurt my neighbor, or I want to do something that's destructive to nature. You come out of that cosmic sea with love in your heart, filling your heart, and you sense that union with your neighbor, or with the earth, or with the stars, or with the planets. And there's nothing but goodwill that is created. Experiencing that love, that divine love, that transcends our understanding, you realize that the flower wouldn't bloom without that love. The sun wouldn't rise without that love. So it truly is a two-way symbiotic relationship. So if we circle back to the Sefer Yetzirah, specifically talking about stars, the Hebrew word that the Sefer Yetzirah uses is kokav. Now these two syllables broken up have a numerical value, the first syllables of 26 and the second syllable of 22. 26 is equal to the numerical value of the holiest divine sound, divine name in our tradition, Yud He Vav He. And 22, of course, is equal to the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, the primordial sounds of creation. So the idea of kokav, which means stars, luminaries, is this union of the divine creation within ourselves with those 22 sounds as we use as mantras. So when we have this connection and we use those sounds to transcend deep within ourselves and make that connection with that field of consciousness and the field of consciousness of the stars, the covenant is between us and the stars, but also between us and the divine within us and within the stars. Naturally, we don't need an observatory or a gigantic telescope like we have at UMI to do meditative stargazing, but it helps a lot. So I'm inviting you to come to UMI, learn these practices, enjoy our observatory and telescope, and turn these concepts into reality through experience. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you and shalom.